Anything goes in Indiana Jones's sophomore outing. Magic rocks, chilled monkey brains, a guy pulling out another guy's still beating heart, a divine mind control potion, a voodoo doll. Does any of this stuff have a basis in Indian folklore or mythology? Or, like those American alligators underneath the rope bridge, were the more fantastical elements of this 1984 prequel imported from abroad? I'm I.E. Neverday. Let's take a look. As I explored in my previous video, the first Indiana Jones movie took a mythical New Mexican city of gold and transported it to a cloud forest in Peru for its opening sequence. Turns out Temple of Doom does something similar, and it involves the chilled monkey brains that appear later. But first, we need to understand this. Who's in that jade urn? The reason Indy is in Shanghai, at Club Obi-Wan no less, is so he can deliver Nurhachi's ashes to a Chinese crime lord, Lao Che, in exchange for a diamond. Now, Nurhachi was a real person. Born in 1559, he famously united a bunch of Jurchen tribes, founding the latter Jin dynasty in 1616. Nurhachi's son rebranded the dynasty as the Great Qing and renamed the Jurchen the Manchu. Hence, Lao Che's claim that Nurhachi was the first emperor of the Manchu dynasty is true. Nurhachi himself wouldn't have phrased it that way, but looking back, that's essentially what he was. And I'd be remiss not to mention that Nurhachi's familial clan, the Asen-gyoro, claimed it was descended from a legendary 13th century warrior, Bukuri Yongsun, who was born of a heavenly virgin, Fekelen, who became pregnant with Bukari after eating a piece of red fruit that was dropped by a magpie. It's a great bit of mythology that the Asen-gyoro tribe straight up stole from another Manchu tribe, the Hura. To be fair, Nurhachi's clan was in need of a PR glow-up, as they had once been subservient to China's previous rulers, the Ming dynasty, a fact that they desperately wanted to hide. That's why Nurhachi's son, Hong Taji, came up with that new name for their culture, Manchu, in the first place. He wanted to create some separation from their Ming-ruled Jurchen past. But that's not all Hong Taji did. He also hid the original editions of history books that tied the Jurchens/Manchus to the Ming dynasty, and he kicked all of the Ming chefs out of the palace kitchen, replacing them with Manchu chefs. So there was a complete menu reset here. Unk would have been pissed. And if you're wondering where the heck I'm going with this, I'm going to a feast. Specifically, the Manchu Han Imperial Feast. Legend has it that Hong Taji's grandson, Kangxi Emperor, came up with the feast as a way to settle tensions between the Manchu and Han peoples. The menu was extravagant, boasting 32 delicacies, some from the land, some from the sea, and some from the mountains. And it is on this mountain menu, nestled between bear paws and ape lips, no, seriously, that we find monkey brains. As noted by Buddhist studies scholar Holly Gailey in the Journal of Buddhist Ethics, one of the most infamous examples of the, quote, excesses of exotic Chinese banquet dishes was, quote, eating live monkey brains right out of the skull. End quote. As far as I can tell, this is the best documented example of a culture eating, or at least preparing, monkey brains. Granted, some scholars argue the original 32 delicacies menu originated as a joke, or folklore. Jokelore? Regardless, there's no strong historical evidence linking monkey brains to cuisine in northern India, which is where Temple of Doom is set. So it's possible writers Willard Huck and Gloria Katz pulled the old Indiana Jones swaparooski here, taking the extravagant monkey brain-infused menu they learned about while researching the Manchu dynasty and applying it to the fictional Pankot Palace. You know, either that or it's an Orientalist caricature. India's government actually refused to let producer George Lucas and director Steven Spielberg film on location in northern India over objections to how Indian culture was depicted in the script. So they moved the production to Sri Lanka, trading Amer Fort, located outside Jaipur, India, which was going to be their Pankot Palace, for sets and matte paintings. Of course, the whole reason Indy ends up at Pankot Palace is because magic rock. The Shivalinga is a sacred stone that gets stolen from its shrine in the village of Mayapur, resulting in dry wells, a sandy river, crops getting swallowed up by the earth, and animals turning to dust. Oh, and the fields get set on fire and all of the children are abducted. So the villagers pray to Shiva to help them recover the stone. And who should fall from the sky but the renowned recoverer of lost sacred items, Indiana Jones, and the singer/actress Willie Scott, and an orphan boy, Short Round, the latter of whom asks Indy, quote, Dr. Jones, did they make the plane crash to get you here? To which Indy replies, no shorty, it's just a ghost story. Don't worry about it. The thing is though, the Shivalinga is real. only it's not always made of stone. Shivalingas, or lingams, are representations of the Hindu deity Shiva, and in addition to rock, can be made from wood, metal, clay, and even precious stones. They're characterized by their phallic shape, which makes sense given that they were originally constructed to commemorate that time Shiva got his erect penis lopped off by the holy Hindu sages known as rishis. I'll let Hinduism scholars Constance A. Jones and James D. Ryan, authors of the Encyclopedia of Hinduism, take it from here. Quote, "Instead of falling, Shiva's penis took off at lightning speed and fearsome energy and began rocketing around the universe, causing endless destruction. The frightened rishis went to the gods to see how they could save the universe from destruction. The gods called upon the Devi, or goddess, to offer her yoni as a safe place for the Shiva lingam to rest. Thus it is that every Shiva lingam rests on a representation of the vagina of the goddess." End quote. Get your mind out of the gutter for a second and recognize what this means. There is a mythical basis for the village of Mayapur being destroyed once its Shiva linga is removed from its designated yoni. The Thuggi cult, when they stole the stone, symbolically unleashed Shiva's rocket penis in the process. It's also noteworthy that Pankot's prime minister, Chater Lal, brings up the time the Sultan of Madagascar threatened to chop off one of Indy's body parts, with Indy suggesting that it was his own linga that was in danger. As for those 3 lines, no, they're not veins. They form a tripundra, which is more commonly seen as a forehead decoration, but the pattern does also appear on some Shiva lingas. As for what those 3 lines represent, they could be will, knowledge, and action, Shiva's signature powers, which are also represented by Shiva's trident. Others see in the lines the Hindu triad of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer and transformer. No, not that kind of transform. Yet another school of thought holds that the first line represents the earth, the second the atmosphere, and the third Shvarga, or heaven. And this is the interpretation Indy goes with when he asks/archaeologist explains to the villagers of Mayapur, quote, "Was the stone very smooth like a rock from a sacred river, with 3 lines across it, representing the 3 levels of the universe?" End quote. So again, this is an accurate, if not limited, description of what a Shiva linga represents in Hindu culture. And can I just say, we're off to a pretty good start here. For Temple of Doom, widely considered to be the goofiest and pulpiest film in the original trilogy, it gets a lot of stuff right in the beginning. Because then that kid shows up with that torn piece of exposition, I mean Sanskrit manuscript, and here's where things start to go off the rails. Because the idea that the deity Shiva gave 5 stones to a holy fella named Sankara atop Mount Kalisa so he could battle evil with them is made up. It actually sounds more like the biblical backstory of Raiders of the Lost Ark, in which the Judeo-Christian god gives stone tablets to a holy fella named Moses atop Mount Sinai than Hindu mythology. Now, Hindu tradition does have a figure named Shankara, Adi Shankara, who is remembered as one of India's foremost philosophers and religious thinkers. He's believed to have traveled all over the Indian subcontinent in the 8th century CE, crushing opponents in theological debates. Such stories aren't necessarily historical, they belong to hagiography recorded centuries later. Regardless, nowhere in that literature does Shankara make a pilgrimage to a mountain called Kalisa, because that isn't a real place. He does, however, go to Mount Kailash, which is a real mountain on the Tibetan plateau near where India, China, and Nepal meet. And it is atop Mount Kailash where the god Shiva gifts Shankara not 5 magic stones with diamonds in their centers that glow when they're near each other and are capable of fiery destruction, but a manuscript. A manuscript with 100 verses detailing the many facets of the goddess. Which makes more sense. Adi Shankara was a scholar, not a warrior. Why would Shiva give him explosive, glowy rocks? It's also interesting, to me anyway, that in his teachings, Shankara doesn't mention Shivalingas, the special rocks meant to represent Shiva's power. But he does specifically mention salagramas, special rocks associated with the god Vishnu. This, according to South Asian studies scholar Jacqueline Southern-Hurst. All this to say, the Shankara stones in the movie don't really have anything to do with the legendary Hindu figure Shankara. As for the Thuggi heart rip ritual we see in the film, it's complicated. While there are seemingly historical groups that bore the name Thuggi in India, these were roving bands of robbers who infamously strangled their victims. So that scene when the Thuggi assassin sneaks up behind Indy? Accurate. But portraying the Thuggi as a clandestine cult that performs ritual human sacrifices in an underground temple less accurate. True, the first time the British officially documented the Thuggi in northern India was in 1809, when the magistrate James Law's assistant described them as, quote, a set of people denominated Thugs who have from time immemorial carried on their abominable and lamentable practices, as from the nature of their proceedings I do not conceive it possible to prevent immediately their covert and secret deeds, but this evil is even now gradually lessening, end quote. Then in 1818, Law's successor, Thomas Parry's assistant, asserted that the Thuggi, quote, worshipped and sacrificed a kid to obtain the auspicious protection of their deity, end quote. I guess the assistants did all the writing back then. And I'm assuming the kid here is in reference to a young goat, but you never know. It's also true that when the Chinese monk Hyun Sang journeyed to India in the 7th century CE, he recorded that some bandits by the Ganges River nearly sacrificed him to their goddess. And later, a temple was pointed out to him, now identified with one near Bhagalpur, where human sacrifices were allegedly performed. But, and this is a big but, Yao Seng's accounts were only interpreted as Thuggi activity retroactively by British colonizers in the 1800s. And as colonial India historian Kim A. Wagner pointed out, quote, by that rationale, all accounts of banditry and human sacrifice in ancient India would have to be taken as referring to the thugs of the 19th century, end quote. The fact is, the Thuggi phenomenon wasn't ancient, nor was it religious, at least not originally. We'll get into it. There's even a school of thought that holds the Thuggi never actually existed in large numbers, and that they were, for the most part, a 19th century colonial fabrication, a false threat to which the British Empire could point to justify passing more restrictive laws. Regardless, there is no iteration of the Thuggi in history or folklore where they pull still beating hearts out of people's chests. That imagery is much more closely associated with Aztec tradition. To quote the 16th century Spanish Jesuit missionary Jose de Acosta, quote, the usual method of sacrifice was to open the victim's chest, pull out his heart while he was still alive, and then knock the man down, rolling him down the temple steps, which were awash with blood. End quote. Lovely. We're not done with the Thuggi yet though, because the other big trick they have up their billowy on-screen sleeves is the blood of Kali. The Thuggi high priest Mola Ram forces Indy to drink this mystical concoction, which puts our protagonist into that dreaded drugged-out state known as the Black Sleep of Kali Ma. Certainly there's no mythical basis for— oh wait, there could be. In 1816, the writer Richard C. Sherwood noted that the Thuggi believed Kali to be their tutelary or guardian deity. Then between 1836 and 1848, the Thuggi and Dacoity Suppression Acts specifically targeted child traffickers and bandits who non-lethally poisoned their marks. The implication being that the Thuggi regularly partook in such activities, just like what we see in the film. As for how the Thuggi and their non-lethal poison became associated with their goddess Kali, Wagner has got us covered. Quote, the myth of the divine origins of Thuggi was based on a well-known story from the Devi Mahatmya, according to which Kali fought the demon Raktabija, along with a group of goddesses called Machkas. In the original story, Kali licked up the blood and swallowed the multiplying demons who emerged from it, and this seems to have become strangulation in the Thugs version, where they had also taken the role of the Machkras. End quote. Let me back up a second. Kali is a Hindu goddess of time, death, and destruction, and depictions of her sometimes show her stepping on the corpse of Shiva. Shiva, of course, is presented in the film as the tutelary god of the villagers, and by extension, the god of our protagonists. Kali, meanwhile, is presented as the tutelary goddess of the Thuggi. And I think this was a smart writing decision, putting one deity in the good guy's corner and one deity in the bad guy's corner. And having those deities be Shiva and Kali makes sense, folklorically speaking. Overall, Temple of Doom would have scored pretty well on the folklorical accuracy scale, if not for that little jerk the Maharaja and his voodoo doll. This one's just— look, I get it. Anything goes. That's the film's mantra. But voodoo has absolutely no connection to northern India or Hinduism whatsoever. There was even a scene cut from the film where Indy acknowledges this. To quote the script, I am interested in the occult. And this is a krita. Indiana picks up a small clay figurine and examines it. It's like the voodoo dolls of West Africa. The krita represents your enemy. It gives you complete power over him. End quote. Bullshit. The made-up word Indy uses here, Krita, was likely derived from Kritya, which is the name of a goddess/demon from the Vedic literature who is associated with quote-unquote black magic. But certainly not voodoo, because the modern version of voodoo dolls we're all familiar with, where you make them look like people you don't like and stick pins in them so the actual people feel the pain, those didn't really appear until the 19th century in New Orleans. Yes, Indy's partially right that the dolls originated in West Africa, but the real history of voodoo dolls is more complex. The short version, African spiritual traditions became cross-pollinated with European folk objects known as poppets, which were small dolls or effigies that could be used to hurt people or help people, in a practice known as sympathetic magic. But again, and I can't stress this enough, there is zero connection between voodoo dolls and India. And for that reason, if I were to score the folklorical accuracy of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I'd have to give it a C+. We might have been in B- territory before, but the whole voodoo thing put me over the edge. But what do you think? Let me know what grade you would give Temple of Doom in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and one of the best things you can do is subscribe. That really helps. As always, my name is I.E. Neverday, editor of the Celtic fantasy short story anthology Neon Druid, and creator of the Irish Myths and Folklore and Film YouTube channels. Thanks for coming out. Oh wait, I forgot to do something with the hat. Pretend I put on an Indiana Jones hat. Yeah!